Hi, today is Tuesday, March 31st. Today's lesson is on rectangles. So the question is, what are the properties of a rectangle and its diagonals? So some vocabulary: a rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Rectangle corollary: a quadrilateral is a rectangle if and only if it has 4 right angles. And then rectangle diagonals theorem is a parallelogram is a rectangle if and only if its diagonals are congruent. So as you can see in the picture right here, the diagonals in a parallelogram, they bisect each other, but what's special in a rectangle is that all of those segments are congruent within that are bisected, and the diagonals of a rectangle are congruent to each other. All right, so let's look at our flow chart. Let's see, so we're over here at a rectangle. So rectangle, all angles are right angles and the diagonals are congruent. A rectangle is a parallelogram, so it also has all the properties of a parallelogram. A rectangle is a quadrilateral, so it has the properties of a quadrilateral, and it's also a polygon, so it has all the properties of a polygon. And if you want to grab your sheet to fill that out, I already have it filled out just to save a little time. But a rectangle has 4 sides, adds up to 360. All angles are congruent, they're equal to 90. Both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. Both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. Diagonals are congruent, and diagonals bisect each other. So the big thing with a rectangle is diagonals are congruent and their angles are equal to each other, which they're equal to 90. All right, so here's our first problem. So here's, you're building a frame for a window. The window will be installed in the opening shown in the diagram. And so we have 33 inches on the opposite sides, and we have 44 inches on the other set of opposite sides. So part A, it says the opening must be a rectangle. Given the measurement in the diagram, can you assume that? So we know the properties of a rectangle is that they're a parallelogram. So opposite sides are congruent. So we know for sure we've got a parallelogram. But what we are missing is the fact that the frame has 90-degree angles. It's not shown in the picture, so we can't assume that. Just because you have side lengths that are congruent, opposite side lengths that are congruent, that doesn't mean that you have 90-degree angles. So this would be no, we don't know the angles are all 90 degrees. So as far as we know, it's just a parallelogram. Okay, so part B, you measure the diagonals of the opening. Okay, so let's draw this out. So if we were to measure these diagonals, it says one of the diagonals is 54.8 and the other one is 55.3 inches. What can you conclude about the shape of the opening? Well, we know that a rectangle's diagonals are congruent, and 54.8 is not equal to 55.3, so we can conclude that it's just a parallelogram. So if diagonals are not congruent, then it's not a rectangle. All right, so last question. Suppose you measure only the diagonals of the window opening in the previous example. Okay, not 2 slides up, it's right here. And they have the same measure. Can you conclude that the opening is a rectangle? And that would be yes. So that's one of our definitions of a rectangle, is if the diagonals are congruent, then it's a rectangle. So if diagonals are congruent, then the parallelogram is a rectangle. All right, so here it says in the rectangle QRST, QS, so segment QS is 5x minus 3, or 31. And then RT, which is the other diagonal, is 2x plus 11. So we know it's a rectangle, so we know that the diagonals are congruent to each other. So QS, so segment QS is congruent to segment RT. So we can set those two equations or expressions equal to each other to solve for x. So we have 5x minus 31 is equal to 2x plus 11. Subtract 2x from both sides. So we have 3x minus 31 is equal to 11. Add 31. And we have 3x is equal to 42. Divide by 3. And x is equal to 14. So when x is equal to 14, the two diagonals are congruent to each other.